Today, we're joined by one of the nation's sharpest interpreters of public opinion, pollster Kristen Soltis Anderson, a go-to voice for deciphering what voters truly think, what they fear, and what gives them hope. She tells us where America is right now, what 2026 might look like, and what the numbers reveal about a nation looking for reasons to believe again. From Ballard Studios in the nation's capital, it's 13th and Park.
I never dreamed going into the White House you'd risk your freedom.
We in Congress will act together when we have to act.
They deserve better, and we owe them some results.
I believe this country's best days continue to remain ahead.
I had no idea the monster we unleashed.
I play every night, and people love it. They're going berserk.
Well, I don't have any Emmy Awards behind me yet, but,
I'm sure they're coming.
I'm so glad to be here on 13th and Park.
Well, Kristen, welcome to the new set of 13th and Park. I go back to when we were together probably a better part of a year ago in what I'll now refer to as the closet, the early days of the show, right? This is a little bit different, isn't it?
This is incredible. It's an honor to be back as a second-time guest, but to also get to be in this new space. Congratulations.
Let's start with this kind of table set a little bit. Talk about the mood of the country. Are we hopeful? Are we anxious? Are we fearful? Or a mix of all those things?
A little mix of all of those things, a lot of anxious right now. And that's not something that's new. This is something that's been brewing and building for years. Really, since the COVID pandemic, people have not really unwound from this feeling of stuff feels broken, stuff doesn't feel like it's working, and it feels like institutions have let me down. And that's why we have this feeling of kind of ping-ponging between who do I trust to help solve it. This was a real problem in the 2024 election for Democrats because they were seen as in charge of all of the things that Americans felt like that wasn't working out for them.
Right.
And now the challenge for those who are in power now is Americans are still feeling uneasy. Some Americans feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel, things are moving in the right direction, but there's still a great deal of concern about whether institutions are really doing what they're supposed to do and whether it's possible for someone who works hard and plays by the rules to make ends meet in America today.
But, you talk about institutions. Trust in America's institutions has been declining for quite a while now. I know that Pew Research publishes, I think it's twice a year, a confidence scale. And the only things that are above the 50% cut mark are the military, police, and small business. How do Americans feel confident moving forward for the first time without those kinds of pillars that they kind of can depend on?
Well, it's not so much that they don't trust anything, it's that their trust has shifted.
Okay.
What they trust in has moved. And this is, I think, a lot because of the fragmented information ecosystem we're in. So for many of these institutions where trust has declined, what I think is going on is a combination of sort of justifiable mistrust that is coming from increased transparency, the ability of more information to get out there. There are lots of things that Americans trusted in decades gone by that maybe they shouldn't have trusted quite as much as they did.
Right.
But paired with an information ecosystem that nowadays bad news spreads faster and good news doesn't really spread at all. Stuff that makes you feel goes further than stuff that makes you think, with the exception of this show, I would say. And so what it means is that people are more likely to be seeing stuff that tells them these institutions are rotten, these leaders are off the mark, instead of seeing what's working. And that's leading to just that heightened sense of everything feels broken. So it's a combination of justifiable sense that things aren't working right, but then that's only heightened by the media ecosystem we're living in.
So what do you do to push things that aren't bad, that don't feel bad? How do you break through that?
Well, you have to have things that make people feel something. And I think you still see things have the potential to spread, go viral when they are really feel-good stories or they tap some kind of very universal emotion. But right now, for things that tend to spread and make people create the characterization they have about so many of our leaders and institutions, it is often they're seeing the worst things, not the best things. And people are not wrong for making judgments on that basis. But it also has been the case that, many of these institutions used to at least have friends and allies on one side of the aisle. So take big business. It was not too long ago that you could ask people, do you think that big corporations or big businesses tend to do the right thing? And Democrats and the political left have always been like, no, thank you. But there used to be a time when Republicans generally thought that businesses were good. And that's no longer the case. Now Republicans, as much as Democrats, sort of look at big business with a little bit of skepticism. You have to earn that trust. A lot of Americans are just looking in general at many of these acronyms they used to trust and are going, I don't know, you need to earn it.
You just published a very interesting piece. You said when voters are given a choice between a party getting things done and maybe a party saying the right things, it's like a 32-point gap. That says something, doesn't it? That when you look at this administration, whether you like the president or not, a lot of things are getting done, or they're trying to get a lot of things done very clearly, right? And they're also outspoken about it. So you were almost giving, without giving it, advice to the Democrats. If they really want to seriously contest again, they have to stand for something that is more than just rhetoric. It's like, okay, what are you going to do? Is that what you're truly trying to say?
Yes, and you can think about past elections where the party out of power always kind of has to grapple with this question of, do we have an agenda of our own, or do we just run as we're not those guys?
Right.
And when you are running against a party that is having popularity struggles, it can be tempting to just say, well, we don't need to actually put ourselves out there. We don't need to say what we would do. We just need to say we're not them. And there have been plenty of instances where that's not wrong. I'm sure you've worked on races or put together ads for things where it's like, you just have to explain why you don't want to vote for the other candidate.
Right,
like that's really the bar you need to meet. But I think in this moment, voters are saying it's not enough to just be against the other side. I need to know what it is you're going to do. And I think that's one of the things that was one of Donald Trump's biggest strengths in running for president back in 2024 was that it wasn't just, I'm not going to be Biden. But he also said, this is what I'm going to do at the border. This is what I'm going to do on trade. This is what I'm going to do on the economy. This is what I'm going to do on crime. He got into office and he started doing a lot of it. And that's why I added that question to my survey. What would people rather have? A party that gets things done, and the wording of the question is, even if sometimes its views are a little extreme,
right?
Or a party that is more mainstream but doesn't often get things done as much. And by this huge margin, as you noted, people are okay with someone who colors outside the lines a little bit as long as they're getting things done. And I think that's why he's still sustaining the support of a lot of his supporters, because they're saying, this is what I wanted.
So you think you go back to the 24 election and even before that, you saw the national mood changing. You saw numbers like 3 out of 4 Americans think we're headed down the wrong track. That's like startling. What they're really saying is we don't like the way things are going and we don't like the system underneath it. So you have a president that comes in and says, I agree with you. We're going to change the system. He learned a lot, I think it's fair to say, after his first term in office, and he's putting those lessons into play. Is that kind of underneath your numbers too, that, yeah, there are going to be things we'll disagree with, but we like the fact he's out there?
People define him and the Republican Party these days as strong and as effective, which is not the same as I agree with you, but those attributes I think people felt were really lacking. And that is what has given him more latitude to do things that voters might otherwise give a bit of a side eye to. His biggest challenge is going to be the cost of living question that came after Democrats the whole election, and they were constantly caught in this problem of saying, no, it's affordable. Just look at this economic data. Don't believe your lying eyes, and that obviously didn't work out for them. And I worry, and this is part of why I wrote this piece in the New York Times, was to warn Republicans you can't do the same thing. That right now, Democrats, they may look divided. They don't have an agenda. They are now mad at each other because of how some of them caved or whatever we're calling it around the shutdown. It looks like Democrats in disarray. But there was a point in time when Republicans were like that too. It was after the 2008 election. Republicans lose big time. Barack Obama becomes president. He's got unified government behind him, filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. Republicans are in the wilderness. And yet they got their act together. They put forward an agenda and a strong message. They rallied grassroots support. They got unified. And they did great in the 2010 election because Democrats got complacent. And so as much as anything, my message to Republicans in that New York Times piece is don't get complacent.
But if you're giving advice to Democratic candidates, they have to have the other piece of it, right? Which is to stand on their own 2 feet and say what they really believe and be willing to fight for it, not fight the president and not fight the other party, fight for things that people are looking for.
Absolutely. And I think that when you look at the results from the 2025 elections, for instance, you had some Democratic candidates who were able to kind of get across the finish line by positioning themselves as, we're going to try to be moderate and we're going to try to focus on issues like affordability. And that kind of a message can be very potent. So Republicans have to be ready to push back, but Democrats, they've got to focus on that kind of stuff, not the stuff that their most active, agitated online activists tell them to do, because that will pull them off message and it will make it harder for them to capitalize on what could be a good midterm for Democrats.
So there's been a premium in the last decade or more that candidates have placed on trying to push the envelope, right, to get attention. But is that what Americans are looking for today more than they are leaders who lead? And there's a difference. Leaders who are doing the things, the business of the country, that Americans want and expect.
I think in an ideal world, they'd like someone who can do, I say, a little bit of both, not necessarily chasing clicks, but being a compelling and charismatic communicator really does matter. And I think it's very easy to look at someone like a Zoran Mamdani and just say like, well, how much of this is all just like, he's very progressive and he does this quirky stuff on TikTok, and like how much there is there. But I don't dismiss being a political athlete who's able to be charismatic and be attention grabbing, because we're in such a noisy moment that if you can't grab the spotlight, all that leadership might not get noticed, might not get appreciated.
Good point.
At the same time, I don't think that voters are looking for bomb throwing. I don't think that they're looking for negativity. I think that they are exhausted. And that's something that I hear pretty consistently when I do focus groups, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, that there's a feeling that we are too divided, that the temperature has been turned up too high, and that this is a moment when they're really hoping the fever can break. The problem is they think the other side's got to be the one to turn the temperature down first.
Right. Well, we saw, the recent news about Marjorie Taylor Greene and how she's saying she's going to turn the page, right? And we'll find out, if that's something she can actually follow through on. But I think that if you're a part of what I call the old guard, you got to be shaking in your boots. Those who have been around for, been in elective life for 10, 20, 30 years, they're much older. They are less adept at the new tools of communication. You saw what happened in New York, where it looked like Cuomo was questioning why anyone would ever watch TikTok. He was referring to Mamdani as the TikTok candidate, and that was actually a credit to Mamdani in that election and that electorate, right?
Exactly. And I think it can be easy for commentators to chase like the new shiny object and say like, oh, look, this is rallying young voters. In New York City, it worked. You saw a big surge in young people turning out in that primary who normally don't. I mean, that was a really big bet on Zoran Mamdani's part, and it worked out. It doesn't mean it will work everywhere. Just being the internet's darling does not guarantee that actual voters will turn out for you. You have to be able to translate it into something that motivates people on the ground, not just something that they click like on and move about their day.
What are people maybe starting to look for that isn't quite happening yet, that may be a marker for what is going to happen in the midterms?
Well, one thing that I think people are frustrated about is they feel like if you work hard and you play by the rules in America today, that's no guarantee that you'll get ahead. Maybe it's a false memory of a past time where they assume that used to be the case. Maybe it's never really been the case, but people think that's what we ought to be striving toward. And it doesn't feel like we can. And so you see issues like housing affordability. Big deal was made out about that in New York City, but it's not just New York City where that's an issue. That's an issue everywhere, especially for younger generations, millennials who now aren't young anymore, but still are some cases struggling to be able to buy that first home. Those sorts of things that you thought of as, well, if I work hard, I play by the rules, I should be able to buy a home, have a family, have a good, fulfilling life. And like those don't feel like guarantees. And especially for Generation Z, they're feeling a lot of anxiety about how fast the world is changing and whether that house and that family and that sort of stable, steady, joyful life, is that something that they'll ever be able to achieve? And I think AI is one of these issues that's going to massively disrupt this conversation, for better or worse. I don't yet know. I try to be an AI optimist because I'd rather be than be a doomer. But, these questions of like, what is the meaning of work? And what is it that an individual person is able to accomplish? A lot of these questions are going to be dramatically rethought in the next few years. If AI is as powerful and transformational as things like the internet and electricity, which when I've asked my survey respondents, what do you think is more likely, that AI is going to be that level of transformational? Or is it going to be a thing you use to like do spreadsheets better? And overwhelmingly, they say the former. This is going to really change life on this earth as we know it. We just don't know yet, good or bad. So I would watch for that conversation to ramp up very quickly as these tools get much more powerful, as workplaces adopt them, and as it begins to transform our economy at a very rapid clip.
Of course, it gets very complicated with AI because AI, you just referenced it, needs a lot of power.
Yeah.
To generate that power, we have to do things, especially younger voters are not comfortable with. On the energy front, we had the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, on not long ago, and he kind of laid out the chessboard because he was talking about if we don't generate more electricity, we can't run the data centers that runs AI. And if we fall behind in the competition for AI, and we know China and others are going right at it with everything they've got, there are real consequences to the quality of life that these young voters are going to be inheriting.
Exactly. And I think this question of, do we then try to produce as much as we can, or do we try to put in place restrictions that say, we're going to hold ourselves back? These are tough conversations about the environment. They're tough conversations about how we allocate resources.
Right.
And they are conversations that are coming quickly. And I think they're coming more quickly than most politicians realize. But as soon as you start having constituents sort of fighting over stuff happening in their own backyard, that at a big picture level, we may say this is necessary for competition with China. But at a micro level, someone's going, well, what does this mean for my community? Those are the sort of tense conversations that are going to require real leadership from politicians. And I'm not confident yet that anybody is ready for the speed at which this stuff is coming.
I believe that demography trumps geography always when it comes to voting and voting movements and assessing where the vote may go. I'm more interested in what's happening with younger voters, what's happening with the suburban vote, with women 25 to 45 that are working or non-working. What are you seeing right now, Kristen, in the data in terms of demography? Maybe the shifts in demography, some of which are suggested even by the 25 elections, that maybe the suburban vote is starting to flip back a bit. And even minorities that I think Donald Trump did very, very well with in 24, they softened a bit too. What are you looking at?
So you never want to read too much into an off-year election, in part because, as you know, the voter pool in those elections is so much smaller. But it is instructive who opts out of being part of that pool in an off year. And the challenge Republicans will face is that they have built this new exciting coalition that includes a lot of people who are what we would call a low-propensity voter. They are not someone who necessarily knows or turns out for the assistant deputy dog catcher primary at an off year, you know what I'm saying? And so they are somebody who, when a presidential election comes around, they can be reliably turned on to vote. And they did in big numbers for Donald Trump. But are they going to turn out and choose between Winsome Sears and Abigail Spanberger? Then maybe they'll stay on their couch. And so that's a risk Republicans have. They have this new exciting broad-based coalition, but energizing that coalition in a moment when Donald Trump's not on the ballot or it is in sort of an unusual part of the political cycle is hard. So you see there's some of these special elections where Democrats are really overperforming in places that Republicans thought, well, wait, that's our turf. What's going on? So I don't want to read too much into the off year, but it should send up a warning bell to Republicans. Like, you need to energize your voters. Let those who turned out for Donald Trump in 2024 know, even though he's not on the ballot this time, his ability to get things done in his last 2 years will be on the ballot. And getting that message to those voters is key. But also, for many of them, they're less interested in a party and they're more interested in who's getting things done on the issues that matter to them.
There you go.
And so if he can point to economic wins, if the economic data a year from now looks really great, then it'll be a much different conversation than if a year from now people are still anxious about inflation, still worried about cost of housing, still worried about cost of healthcare, and so on and so forth.
I think it's fair to say that the Biden administration's message was more about unity and stability in the country. The Donald Trump Republican message was more about bold change. Well, we're now experiencing bold change. And on the economic front, it's the economy, stupid, right? A lot of these changes are going to need a little time to mature. It's understandable, right, Kristen, that Americans would still be uncertain and nervous about where this is going. Change always is, right? But you would think by the 26 midterms, whatever was set in motion is going to be somewhat understood, at least in the first couple readings. Isn't that kind of the major piece of this, that everything else will kind of revolve around?
Yes. And I think what's really fascinating about the actions that the president took so early on is that normally when you take office, if the economy's not good, you can kind of blame it on your predecessor for a little while and say, look, I was handed a really bad economy. But by very quickly moving to big, bold action on things like tariffs, suddenly Trump owned that economy and felt like he owned that economy and felt like he was glad that he did. Like, let's dispense with this idea that we're going to let this be Joe Biden's economy anymore. But the risk of that is you own it. And so if you get to next year and voters conclude that the tariffs have not, in fact, raised their cost of living too much, that they had a very nice Christmas, I remember cringing, like if I could give messaging advice to the president, his like, well, you can buy fewer dolls for your children for Christmas. And I thought like, oh, that's
You were thinking of your 1 and 3-year-old when he said that, right?
And I'm like, look, they do not need any more dolls. Like my girls are they're lucky. We do not need any more toys in our house. But at the same time, I don't really know that I love a politician telling me like, just get by with less, it'll be fine. And I think that's a tough message to sell to voters. Politicians do not have a good track record of telling people in a time that is theoretically supposed to be peacetime, like you're going to need to sacrifice for this greater long-term good. That's a hard political message to sell.
So a lot of the press that the administration is getting right now is about foreign policy. And they made incredible breakthroughs, the Middle East in particular. And we can now actually envision maybe the Abraham Accords being signed off on by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Ukraine, I think, at least you see a possibility for that being brought in for landing. All these things that are happening to the credit of the administration. But does that register at all until or unless people feel in their day-to-day life here that things are where they need to be?
It's hard to get people to focus elsewhere when they feel like things are very dire at home. And even if you realize that there are big connections between those two things, we can't get to peace and prosperity at home if the rest of the world is on fire. You have seen a real shift in the Republican Party, an enormous shift over the last 20 years from a view that American values applied and promoted abroad, using our resources to project strength, that is a net benefit to our country. You now have an awful lot of Republicans who say, I'm sorry, I don't think that that's a good use of our resources. I don't think that's a good use of our attention. I think we need to be at home. And I think President Trump has tried to navigate that tension within his own party because he has notably been a critic of some of the past foreign engagements and entanglements that the U.S. has had, while at the same time being the one to go bomb nuclear sites in Iran, So he's got this interesting, unorthodox approach that I think is part of what has kept the party together on this issue that is otherwise fairly divisive. There are big generation divides on this too, where for older voters, they are slightly more inclined to care about foreign policy because for many of them, they remember the Cold War. Yeah. They know what it's like to be in a world where we are in a competition with another great superpower, where we are fighting for influence, where we know what it feels like to be under the threat of an outside force. But for younger Americans, they're less interested in that kind of a conversation, and they feel so dire about what's happening at home that they think we need to focus there. So when I ask questions about, do you think that the biggest threats to our country come from inside or from outside? You find majorities on the Republican and Democratic side who think the biggest threats are internal.
Are you seeing a lot of engagement by younger voters right now?
Right now, a lot of younger voters are feeling very depressed. And I think you're seeing engagement look different ways on different sides. I think on the conservative side, in the wake of what happened to Charlie Kirk, you are seeing this fire lit underneath young conservatives who feel like they are under siege, that they feel like finally with the 2024 election, it was okay for them to express their views on campus. They sort of felt like there was momentum growing and now feel like they've all got to come together more than ever to fight for what they believe in. But at the same time, I think young progressives are also feeling a little fired up because for them, they feel like now is the time to get the gerontocracy out of their party, that they've been governed by 80-year-olds too much, and it's time for them as a new generation to rally behind the Zoran Mamdanis of the world and try to take claim of their own political party. And then I think for young people who are in the middle, who are not politically engaged, I think right now a lot of them are checked out because they're not sure that either party is addressing the cost of living concerns that really are plaguing them. And I think if anybody is able to demonstrate that they can do that and fix other big things, you will have their attention again, but they're waiting to see results.
Looking ahead to 26, any predictions about where you think we're headed there and maybe ultimately change all over again what we're now experiencing?
Yeah, so I feel like one thing that I'm just keeping a very close eye on is what's happening with all of the redistricting fights. Because the House right now is so closely divided. Democrats don't need to pick up very many seats in order to take control of that chamber, which could then really throw a wrench in the Trump administration's desire to get anything through Congress for the remaining 2 years. So I'm keeping my eye very closely on that because it also makes it hard for me as a pollster, if we don't even know what the lines are yet in some of these places, to be able to say, oh, okay, well, how many swing districts are there? What do the voters look like there? So that to me is the big X factor that is making the House hard to predict. The Senate side, I still feel like Republicans are likely to hold it, but a lot is going to come down to who do Democrats decide to nominate. If they are going through their own Tea Party moment in the way I wrote about in that New York Times piece. If you remember from back then, there were a lot of seats Republicans probably could have added to their already, ostentatious pickup totals if they had done better at getting the right people to win in certain primaries. But at the same time, you don't always just want the fuddy-duddy establishment person to win the primary, because sometimes the new outside voice is the fun one. In that 2010 election, it was Marco Rubio, who was the outsider Tea Party candidate who took on the establishment, wound up winning, and it worked out quite well for him and for the Republican Party alike. So I'm waiting to see how do some of these primaries shake out on the Democratic side, who's actually going to make it to the ballot for next November.
It's interesting to talk about Marco. You see where Marco is now. And he was that kind of outsider pushing the envelope. Now he's right beside of the president of the United States. I pay very close attention to what you do, Kristen, because one is you very early on carved out a reputation for telling America what people not over 45, but under 45 were thinking. The second thing is, I think you really look beneath the surface and beneath the data to try to figure out what is it really telling us. And a lot of times you see the horse race numbers, you say, wow, now I understand where things are. Not unless you ask the follow-up question, which is, what is underneath that? What are people really feeling? What are they trying to tell us in these numbers? And I think you've been incredible in deciphering that for America. You will continue to do so as we move forward. Can't wait to see what happens in the 26 midterms, which to you and I feels like a light year away, but it's already begun. And I really appreciate you coming back on now the new set of 13th and Park. You were one of the most compelling people we've ever interviewed.
Thank you, Adam. It's really a pleasure to get to be here.
Great to be with you.